All right, now let's talk about the actual central nervous system. So, show beginning. Okay, so I usually like to start off showing this picture, and I think it's a pretty awesome picture. Um, okay, one, this is Einstein's brain. This brain right here was found in a leftover remains of was basically an insane asylum when we still had insane asylums. And if you notice, the big difference here and here is the fold. Okay, the lobes are all there. Okay, so frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe. You can see those lobes just like in this brain here. And the size difference is not actually size, like that's just the picture. But the folds are obviously absent. Okay, and I'll explain why that's actually really, really important. Okay, this is another picture. I stole this from nature. This shows a huge bunch of different brains. Okay, um, and you'll see primarily the difference in the folds. I mean, there's some differences in shape, obviously, but that's based on the skull. But if you look at the folds, you'll see there's a dramatic difference. Okay, the more intelligent an animal is, actually, the more folds. And I'll explain why in a little bit as well. Okay. Okay. So, okay. So the central nervous system consists of two parts: the brain and the spinal cord. We often think about it just the brain, but the spinal cord is just as important. Okay. And I'll explain a little bit. All right. So the terms unique to the CNS are rostral and caudal. And rostral means toward the nose. Caudal means toward the tail. You have one. Okay, and it seems kind of weird in humans, right? Because one, we don't have a tail, and two, our nose and tail are, where the tail is supposed to be is in different directions. But if you look at an animal like cats or dogs, the nose to tail run pretty much in a straight line. Okay, so what the brain controls everything basically. Okay. Okay, so the brain arises from the front part of what's called the neural tube. Okay, and we'll cover this a little bit when we go into embryology, but basically you start off with a tube. Okay, the first 3 weeks, your nervous system is this basic tube that's hollow. Okay, and that's called the dorsal nerve cord. Okay, at this one end, your brain starts to swell. Okay, what turns your brain starts to swell? And it forms three little bumps: a proencephalon, mesencephalon, rhomencephalon, forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. From there, the proencephalon turns into diencephalon and telencephalon. The mesencephalon stays the same, and then the rhomencephalon turns into metencephalon, myencephalon. Okay, I know these three are kind of similar to each other in terms of what they sound like, but just remember, like, they're in alphabetical order. Okay, that's how I remember these three. Okay, and the next important thing to notice about this picture is the blue stuff. It's actually fluid. There's actually fluid inside your central nervous system, and it's called cerebral spinal fluid. Okay. All right. So these are the brain structures. We'll go over all of these in a second. And these are the ventricles that supply fluid, okay, the blue stuff. Okay. So what happens is here, you start off with a cord, okay, it starts to swell, and you can see there's folds upon folds. The folding upon folding, okay, is the wrinkling of the cerebral hemispheres, and that makes more surface area. And more surface area means that I can fit more neurons onto the surface, and therefore I can have more neurons. Okay. All right. The brain is classified into 4 regions: the brainstem, okay, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the cerebral hemispheres. Okay. Okay. The organization of the brain. Okay. So the organization of the brain is pretty simple. We have gray matter, okay, on the very outside, and an inner layer of white matter, and then some deeper, darker gray matter. Okay. The reasoning is pretty simple. Okay. Uh, if you remember back to the last lecture I gave, gray matter is actually the neuron cell bodies, and the short dendrites. The axons are the white matter. So we need, for us, the gray matter is on the outside. That's why we need more surface area. The folds generate more surface area, so we can attach more gray matter, more cell bodies. Okay, that's what makes us more intelligent. We have more cells, more brain cells. Okay. Okay. So the outer layer is also called cerebral cortex. Okay, I'm sure you guys heard that term before, although you probably didn't know exactly what it meant. It actually means the outer layer of the brain. Okay. All right. The ventricles of the brain. Okay, the ventricles of the brain are expansions of the inner tube right there, right? The central cavity. It expands and filled with cerebral spinal fluid and is lined with epidermal cells. Okay, so here, that's the ventricles. You definitely have to be aware of where they are, but you don't have to know the subparts of the ventricle, right? So you don't have to know the anterior versus posterior horn. You just have to know this C-shaped thing right here is the lateral ventricle, okay? Or the apertures and stuff like that, okay? So the lateral ventricles are located in the cerebral hemispheres, okay? The third ventricle lies in the diencephalon. Between the third and fourth ventricle is something called the cerebral aqueduct, okay, or the aqueduct of Sylvius. It connects the third and fourth ventricles, okay? It's a very narrow tube, okay? And then the fourth ventricle lies in the hindbrain and connects to the central canal, the spinal cord. So here, okay. So these are the lateral ventricles. This is the third ventricle. This narrow tube here, okay, it's actually probably narrower than what they're drawing here, okay? It's the cerebral aqueduct, and then this is the fourth ventricle, okay? Okay, these things supply like cerebral spinal fluid, okay? The cerebral spinal fluid is made by epidermal cells, and they actually circulate the fluid not only to the inside of the brain here, but also through the apertures, it goes around the outside of the brain. Your brain literally floats on the cerebral spinal fluid, okay? And that helps nourish the brain and helps protect the brain from movement. And so there's a video that I'm going to post a link to that will show the brain and how soft and squishy the brain actually is, okay? And how the cerebral spinal fluid actually protects the brain. So next thing, the brainstem, okay? The brainstem consists of 3 parts: the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, okay? All right, the brainstem, first of all, one of the general functions that it connects the brain to the spinal cord, okay? It has all the, all but 2 of the cranial nerves attaching to it. I'll explain what those are in a little bit. Okay, the general function of the brainstem is that it produces the automatic behaviors necessary for survival. So I want to give you guys a minute to think about what that is. Okay. Okay. So now, hopefully, you guys have thought about breathing, right? What else? Heartbeat, right? These are two biggest things, but other things that are necessary for survival. Um, how dilated your blood vessels are, some really simple reflexes like choking and sneezing and coughing. All of these are really primitive functions. Okay. So one of the things you guys have probably heard is like brain dead. Okay, brain dead, or like vegetable, right? So like when you get shot, or your skull gets, your brain gets damaged, but your brain stem is still functioning. If your brain stem is still functioning, that means you're still breathing and you're still having a heart rate, even though you have no higher cognitive function. That you're not thinking or processing anything, but you're still alive. Okay. Okay. So here's the brain. Okay. Here is the spinal cord. Okay, leading to the parts of the brain. This right there is the medulla oblongata. Okay, that right there is the pons, and then that right above the pons and behind the pons is the midbrain. Okay. All right. You don't have to know the landmarks and stuff like that, or the nerves for now. Okay, the medulla oblongata contains, again, the stuff that keeps you alive, the cardiac center, which controls heart rate, the vasomotor center, which controls dilation of blood vessels, one of the respiratory centers, the medullary respiratory center. Okay, it measures the amount of CO2 coming into your in your breathing. Okay, the centers for hiccuping, sneezing, swallowing, coughing. Okay. Okay, the pons is bridge between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. It has motor tracts coming in from the cerebral cortex. Okay. Okay. Uh, the midbrain, okay, lies between the diencephalon and pons. Okay. It has a cerebral aqueduct, so the cerebral aqueduct runs through the midbrain. Okay. Uh, Okay, the midbrain, there's only one feature on there that I really want you guys to know, and that's this, the corpora quadrigemina. Okay? Corpora, body, quadrigemina, four Gemini twins. So the four bodies that look like twins. You can see that on the back of the midbrain. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? These work on reflexes for visual reflexes and for reflexive reflexes to sound. Okay. All right. Also in the midbrain, there's two pigmented nuclei. One is the substantia nigra. The substantia nigra is a lot darker than the rest of it. Where that's where it's called substantia nigra. This layer, okay, is what controls movement or helps control some movement. And it's actually the layer that's damaged in Parkinson's, okay, or control. Okay. Um, okay. Okay. The cerebellum. Okay. Cerebellum. Cerebellum is located dorsal to the pons and medulla. It smooths out and coordinates body movements. I'll explain a little bit about what that means a little bit. Okay. The cerebellum. So you can see this is the cerebellum. Okay. The cerebellum has gray matter on the outside and the white matter on the inside. And the white matter in this case, you see how it looks like a tree? Okay. It's called the tree of life, the arbor vitae. Okay. What this cerebellum does, okay, is to coordinate body movements. Okay. So, okay, it receives three types of information: information from equilibrium, information on where you currently are, the current movement of the limbs, okay, and the movement from the cerebral cortex. And it integrates all those three things and smooths it out together. So your cerebral cortex is the one that's actually in charge of the planning and execution of movement. But it's not smooth, it's herky-jerky, and it's not precise. Okay, the cerebellum is the one that smooths it out and tells you where you actually are as opposed to where you think you are. And so it smooths out the coordination. It's also involved in things like muscle memory, like remembering how to do things and stuff like that. Okay, so here's the coordinated movement thing. This should pretty much make sense. So the cerebellum receives information from the motor cortex. Okay, I'll explain to you guys what the motor cortex is in a little bit. The cerebellum then compares intended movement with body position, and then sends instructions back and fine-tunes commands. So the cerebellum is not really in charge of it; it's just fine-tuning it. Okay, so you can actually be missing a cerebellum and be able to move, you're just not going to be able very coordinated. Okay. Okay. The higher cognitive functions of the cerebellum: learning motor skills. Okay. Riding a bike, etc., etc. Okay. Okay. So we'll skip the tracks. Okay. The diencephalon forms the central core of the forebrain. Okay. So di, two, encephalon surrounded by, okay. Okay, so they compose of three pair structures: the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. Okay, so thalamus. Okay, the major purpose of the thalamus is that it is a relay station. Every sense that you have goes to your thalamus before it spreads to your cerebral cortex. Okay, so everything coming from the spinal cord and also from your eyes goes to the thalamus, and from the thalamus it spreads to your diencephalon. Okay, so it is a relay station. Okay, it's not only a relay station, it tempers the signal a little bit, increases and decreases it a little bit, but basically it's a relay station. Okay. Okay. All right, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a very small feature right here. It has a whole bunch of nuclei. Again, a whole bunch of nuclei. Each nuclei is a bunch of neuronal cell bodies that's responsible for one thing. Okay. Okay. The functions of the hypothalamus. For one unit area, this little area controls the whole crap load of crap. Okay, complete control of the ANS, control of emotional responses, control of body temperature. So when you like a fever, it's because one of your hypothalamic nuclei have been reset to a higher temperature. Okay, regulation of thirst and hunger. So damage to that nuclei can, or there's two separate nuclei. The damage to hunger nuclei can give something called Prader-Willi, in which you're literally hungry for life. Okay, no matter what time, when you ate, you are still hungry. Miserable existence. Okay. Control behavior, drive, motivational drive. In particular, your sex drive is actually controlled in the hypothalamus. Okay. Regulation of sleep-wake cycles and control of endocrine system, formation of memory. So before I became a instructor, I did research on the hypothalamus, and we studied hypothalamus. I studied hypothalamus with two different groups. One group was interested in the sexual orientation of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus actually controls sex drive, and what scientists realized was there are different size nuclei in the hypothalamus if you're male or female, and actually gay men have hypothalamus sizes that are more closer to females than straight men. Okay, so there is some type of neural thing to being gay. Okay. 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 The diencephalon, the rest of it is the epithalamus. The epithalamus is a really small little thing. It contains basically one thing, which is the pineal gland. The pineal gland secretes a hormone melatonin, okay, under influence of the hypothalamus. Therefore, it is in control of your circadian rhythm. Your hypothalamus tells you basically what time of day it is, and like during the day, you're supposed to be more active. At night, you're supposed to be more, chill and relaxed, and that is circadian rhythm. Okay, your hypothalamus sends a signal to the pineal gland to actually help control that. Okay. All right. Almost. I'll stop the first part for right here. The second part will deal with the major part of the brain. So we'll pick that up in part 2.